A cold wind slid over the surface of the Danube River, as if trying to bring the call of the unknown to the Roman camp. It was a night when silence seemed thick like fog, and every rustle felt like a harbinger of trouble. Amidst the darkness, hidden behind the wooden walls of the fortifications, one man remained awake. Emperor Marcus Aurelius sat in his tent, hunched over a scroll, quill in hand. His thoughts were heavier than the steel of the sword surrounding him. On the table before him lay a map, etched with lines of borders, rivers, and roads, as if the earth itself was trying to tell him where to go next. The war with the Marcomanni had been raging for more than a year, and it seemed that these endless skirmishes would never end. Each day brought new reports, more often bad than good. One day the camp was looted, the next a bridge was destroyed, and then a messenger arrived with news that the enemy was planning to unite for a decisive strike. And yet, despite the hardships, Marcus Aurelius remained calm. His composure was not feigned. It was the calm of a man who lived by his principles. He knew, if he succumbed to fear, the army would lose its faith as well. And without faith in victory, they were doomed even before they raised their swords. An unusual sound outside the tent caught his attention, a light rustling, as if someone was cautiously stepping on the damp ground. Marcus rose, took his sword, and stepped out. Standing before him was a young soldier. His face was frightened, but he stood straight. "Emperor, forgive me for disturbing you," he began in a trembling voice. "The scouts have just returned. They report that the enemy is preparing to attack. They are twice as numerous as we are. They intend to strike before dawn." The soldier's words hung in the air like a cold mist. Marcus nodded briefly, letting him know he had heard. "Thank you," he said calmly. "Calm yourself and rest. Tomorrow will be a hard day." When the young man disappeared into the darkness, Marcus looked again at the starry sky. It was a moment when anyone else in his place might have felt the weight of fear, but he saw something different. Fate was testing him, as a ruler, as a strategist, as a man. He believed that fate did not give trials to those who were incapable of overcoming them. Returning to his tent, he summoned his advisor, Cassius. This was an experienced warrior and loyal friend, with whom Marcus had shared many victories and defeats. "Cassius, we will not wait for the strike," the emperor said in a firm voice, devoid of even a hint of doubt. "We will attack ourselves tonight." The advisor froze as if not entirely believing what he had heard. "Attack at night? But, Emperor, our men are exhausted." They were hoping for at least a little rest, and the enemy significantly outnumbers us. Marcus responded without hesitation. "If we wait, they will strike when they are ready. In this battle, it will not be the number of swords that decides the outcome, but our determination and reason. At night, we will break their confidence. They will not be prepared." Cassius looked intently at the emperor. There was something in Marcus's eyes that always amazed people. It was the confidence not of a man who believed in luck, but of one who believed in his own reason. The advisor nodded. "As you command, Caesar." Rumors of the unexpected attack quickly spread through the camp. Soldiers, barely having managed to fall asleep, rose at the first orders. And though many were doubtful, the mere thought that they were going into battle under the command of Marcus ignited a fire in their hearts. A cold wind slid over the surface of the Danube River, as if trying to bring the call of the unknown to the Roman camp. It was a night when silence seemed thick like fog, and every rustle felt like a harbinger of trouble. Amidst the darkness, hidden behind the wooden walls of the fortifications, one man remained awake. Emperor Marcus Aurelius sat in his tent, hunched over a scroll, quill in hand. His thoughts were heavier than the steel of the swords surrounding him. On the table before him lay a map, etched with lines of borders, rivers, and roads, as if the earth itself was trying to tell him where to go next. The war with the Marcomanni had been raging for more than a year, and it seemed that these endless skirmishes would never end. Each day brought new reports, more often bad than good. One day the camp was looted, the next a bridge was destroyed, and then a messenger arrived with news that the enemy was planning to unite for a decisive strike. And yet, despite the hardships, Marcus Aurelius remained calm. His composure was not feigned. It was the calm of a man who lived by his principles. He knew, if he succumbed to fear, the army would lose its faith as well, and without faith in victory, they were doomed even before they raised their swords. Marcus found himself in the thick of the action. He was not the kind of emperor who hid behind the backs of his soldiers. His sword gleamed in the darkness, like an extension of his mind. He did not fight with hatred or cruelty. He fought with a clear purpose. For him, this was not just a battle. It was an act of justice, the defense of what he believed to be right. Amid the chaos, Marcus noticed the chief of the Marcomanni. He was a tall, powerful man with a fierce gaze, armed with a massive axe. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, there were more words than in any speech. Marcus understood that this duel would become the symbol of the entire battle. They clashed like two predators, both focused, both confident. The chief swung his axe with incredible force, but Marcus, as if predicting his movements, dodged and delivered a precise strike. Their duel lasted only a few moments, but it felt like an eternity. In the end, Marcus proved faster and more accurate. The chief fell, and with him, the spirit of his people was broken. When the battle was over, Marcus stood among his warriors, covered in dust and blood. His breathing was heavy, but there was no anger or pride in his eyes, only calm. It was a victory, but he knew the cost of every such victory. "Today we have proven that fate belongs to those who dare to challenge it," he said to his soldiers. "But never forget that every step we take must be a step of wisdom and honor. Only then can we preserve what we fight for." These words spread through the army like an echo, leaving in the hearts of each not just a sense of victory, but a sense of dignity. With the first rays of dawn, the Roman camp came alive once more. Soldiers gathered their weapons, raised their tents, and inspected the spoils of war. But more than material wealth, they were united by a sense of pride. They understood that they had just achieved one of the most important victories of the war. And though the enemy had been more numerous, though they had been strong and untamed, the reason and strategy of their emperor had accomplished what had seemed impossible. Marcus Aurelius seemed as unshaken as ever. He walked among his people, greeting each with a short nod or word of gratitude. He noticed the wounded, approached them to offer encouragement, sometimes even helping to dress their wounds. This was part of his nature, to see every person, whether a simple legionnaire or a commander, as an individual deserving of respect. At one point, he stopped near a young soldier, the very one who had brought news of the attack during the night. The boy sat on the ground, leaning against a tree, his arm bandaged. His face showed exhaustion, but his eyes glowed with pride. "You served well last night," Marcus said, sitting down beside him. "Your warning saved many." The soldier blushed, unsure of how to respond. The emperor, whom he had thought of almost as a deity, spoke to him as an equal. "I was just doing my duty, sir," he mumbled. "It was you. You did everything." Marcus smiled gently, shaking his head. "Never forget that none of us wins alone. Every sword, every hand, every step, all of it is part of a single whole. You made your contribution, and it was no less important than any other." The emperor's words stayed with the soldier, a precious memory he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Later that day, when the camp had been put in order, Marcus gathered his commanders for a council. They sat around a long wooden table, surrounded by maps and diagrams. Their faces were serious, but now their eyes held a confidence that had been lacking just a few days earlier. "This victory is important," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "But it does not mark the end of the war. Our enemies will regroup. Their hatred for us is strong. We must be prepared for another strike. But there is something even more important." He paused to ensure everyone was paying attention. "We must not only win, but also think about what comes after. Wars are not eternal, and if we want peace to last, we must build a foundation for it, without cruelty, without a thirst for vengeance, but with wisdom and justice." Cassius, who sat beside him, looked at the emperor with mild surprise. "You want to propose peace, Caesar?" he asked cautiously. Marcus nodded. "Yes, but not yet. The time has not come. We must weaken them to the point where they come to us themselves. But when that happens, we must not humiliate them. We must show them that Rome is not only strength, but also order and prudence." Some of the commanders exchanged glances. The emperor was saying things that many of them found strange, almost unthinkable, but they knew him. They knew he could see further than they could. After the council, Marcus returned to his tent. It was modest, without any luxuries, much like the man himself. Sitting down at his table, he unrolled a scroll and began to write. These lines, written by his hand, would later become part of his famous meditations. They would inspire generations and stand as a testament that even in the midst of war, one could retain their humanity. Do not fight for glory, nor seek victory for its own sake. Fight to preserve dignity, yours and that of those who oppose you, for true victory is the victory over oneself. That night, sitting under the stars, Marcus Aurelius felt that he had done the right thing. The war continued. New battles and trials lay ahead. But he knew that as long as he remained true to his principles, his heart would stay calm. And where there is peace in the soul, there is a strength capable of overcoming any challenge. As the night deepened, the camp once again fell into slumber. Only the wind carried the smells of campfires and damp earth across its expanse. But Marcus Aurelius was still awake. He sat at the entrance of his tent, wrapped in a heavy cloak, staring at the horizon, where faint glimmers of the enemy's campfires flickered in the distance. Those lights reminded him that every moment of peace was merely a pause before the next storm. He reflected. All his life, he had followed the path of reason and virtue, striving to live according to the laws of nature and wisdom, as the Stoics had taught. But now, at the edge of the empire, in the midst of bloodshed, he felt farther than ever from the philosophical discussions that had filled his youth. And yet here, in these harsh conditions, his beliefs found their truest expression. Marcus recalled the words of his mentor, an old Stoic philosopher, who had said that truth reveals itself in adversity. He had said that trials do not break a person, but rather reveal their true nature. At the time, those words had seemed abstract, almost hollow. But now, after years of rule, wars, losses, and victories, he understood their depth. It was now, when everything seemed against you, that you had to remain yourself. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet voice. "Emperor?" He turned to see one of the young officers standing a short distance away. It was Lucius, a capable but still inexperienced commander. His face showed doubt, as if he wasn't sure whether he had the right to disturb the emperor at such a late hour. "Come closer, Lucius," Marcus said calmly, gesturing for him to sit beside him. Lucius sat down, clearly nervous, and after a brief pause, he began to speak. "Forgive my boldness, my lord, but I must ask, how do you find the strength after all we've seen, after all the losses? How do you remain so calm? I'm afraid that one day I won't be able to go on." Marcus looked intently at the young man. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. He knew that many of his soldiers, especially the younger ones, felt the same way. It was natural. Fear, doubt, exhaustion. "Lucius," he began, his voice soft but compelling, "we are all afraid. Fear is a part of human nature. But the difference between those who move forward and those who give up lies not in the absence of fear, but in how we accept it. We cannot control much of what happens around us, but we can always choose how to respond to it." He paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I find strength not because I am better than others or stronger. I simply remember why we do this. We do not fight for glory or wealth. We fight to protect those who depend on us. The women, the children, the elderly, our entire empire. They believe in us, and if we give up, we betray that faith." Lucius nodded, but there was still doubt in his eyes. "And what if we're wrong? What if what we're doing doesn't bring peace?" Marcus smiled, and his smile was full of warmth. "We can always be wrong, Lucius. We are human. But that does not mean we should not try. It is better to err in trying to do what is right than to do nothing out of fear. We may never know what the future holds, but if we act with good intentions, with honor and reason, we have already done all we can." These words seemed to lift the weight that had been binding the young officer. He took a deep breath as if shedding a heavy burden. "Thank you, Emperor. I think I feel a little lighter now." "It is good," Marcus said softly. "But remember, the answer is not in me. The answer is within you. Find what matters to you, what makes you rise every morning, and hold on to it. When Lucius left, Marcus was once again alone under the night sky. He knew there would be many more nights like this, many battles, many conversations he would need to have to support his people, but he was ready for it, because deep down he believed that even the darkest times come to an end. And even if he was not destined to see that bright day, he knew his actions now paved the path to that light for those who would come after him. With that thought, Marcus Aurelius picked up his quill and began to write once more. The moonlight barely pierced the thick clouds that blanketed the sky, but its faint glow was enough to illuminate the parchment on which Marcus Aurelius poured his thoughts. His handwriting was steady, almost meditative. Every symbol reflected the clarity of his mind, every syllable the depth of his reflections. Everything that happens is already ordained by nature. We do not choose the trials we encounter on our path, but we do choose who we will be as we face them. The strength of the human spirit is its true weapon, and reason is its compass. Marcus set the quill down, allowing his words to dry, and once again raised his gaze to the horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond the forests and hills, the enemy waited, preparing for the next clash. But instead of fear or anxiety, he felt only quiet confidence. He knew that life was a series of waves. Some of them would overwhelm you, while others would lift you to the heavens. What mattered was to stay afloat and remember that every wave eventually passes. At that moment, footsteps once again sounded outside his tent. This time it was Cassius. The advisor looked tired, but his eyes, as always, sparkled with keen insight. "Not sleeping, Caesar?" he asked as he approached. Marcus smiled slightly and gestured to the chair beside him. "Tell me, Cassius, how can I sleep when so many thoughts are seeking release?" Cassius sat down, letting out a small chuckle. "You carry the weight of an entire world, Marcus, but sometimes it seems to me you bear it better than the world itself." Marcus laughed. That rare, genuine laugh broke the stillness of the night, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, there was room for lightness. "Oh, Cassius, if only you knew how many times I doubt whether I am doing the right thing. But isn't that the essence of our existence? To seek answers, even when there are none, and to do our best to ensure our actions do no harm?" Cassius nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "That's true, but sometimes I wonder, do you not expect too much from people, Caesar? You speak of virtue, reason, justice. But most of us are simple men. We get tired, we grow angry, we are afraid. Do you never get angry? Never feel fear?" Marcus looked at his friend, his expression turning serious. "Of course I get angry. Of course I feel fear. I am human, Cassius, just like you. But I try to remember that my emotions are only a part of me. They should not govern me. We cannot control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. That in itself is true freedom." Cassius remained silent for a long time, digesting the words. Then he sighed and leaned forward slightly. "You know, Marcus, sometimes I think you are not just an emperor. You are a philosopher who somehow ended up on the throne, or perhaps not by chance." Marcus smiled, though there was a trace of sadness in his smile. "Perhaps you are right. But doesn't that prove that each of us is where we are meant to be, even if we don't understand it ourselves? Our duty is to fulfill our role as best we can, whether as an emperor, a soldier, or a philosopher." Cassius rose, stretching slightly. "Well, Caesar, I'll leave you alone with your thoughts. Tomorrow is a new day, and as always, it will bring its own challenges." "Yes, it will," Marcus agreed. "But while there is night, it is ours." Cassius bowed and departed, leaving Marcus alone once more. The emperor sat for a long time, gazing into the darkness and pondering what awaited them tomorrow. He knew there would be new battles, new difficulties, but he also knew that with each passing day, they drew closer to the peace he so deeply longed for. "Even if I am not destined to see the dawn of that world, I will still fight for it, for that is the meaning of life, to leave behind a light, even if you yourself fade into the shadow." With this thought, he took one last look at the stars and allowed himself a brief rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring a new wave. At dawn, the Roman camp came alive. Soldiers prepared their weapons, sharpened their swords, and inspected their armor. The sounds of routine military activity mixed with the silence of the surrounding forests, where enemy eyes could be hiding behind every tree. Despite the victory of the previous night, tension lingered. Everyone understood that the enemy could strike at any moment. This was a war of attrition, where not only strength but also patience determined the outcome. Marcus Aurelius stood on a small hill, observing the camp. His face remained calm, but his gaze was focused, almost distant. He was already thinking about the next step. War allowed no delays. Victory provided only a brief respite before decisions had to be made again, decisions on which thousands of lives depended. One of the scouts approached him, a young but experienced soldier with a sharp gaze. His face was dusty from the long journey, but he wasted no time delivering his report. "Caesar, I have returned from the eastern frontier. The enemy forces are regrouping. They are fortifying positions by the river and assembling troops. It appears they are preparing for a major offensive." Marcus nodded, considering what he had heard. "How much time do we have?" "A day, maybe 2, the scout replied. "They are waiting for reinforcements. But if they receive them, it will be difficult for us to hold the line." Marcus looked back at the camp, as if trying to find the answer among his soldiers. He knew that in a direct confrontation, the odds were not in their favor. But he also knew that war was not just a battle for territory. It was a battle of minds. And if you could predict your enemy's moves, you were already halfway to victory. He called for Cassius and several other commanders. Their faces were serious, but each of them placed complete trust in their emperor. Marcus began to speak, his voice quiet but firm, like a chisel carving words into stone. "We cannot allow them to gather their strength. If we wait, they will strike when their advantage becomes overwhelming. We must strike first, but not head-on. We will make them believe they are in control of the situation while we surround them." Cassius furrowed his brow, looking at the map Marcus had spread out. "You propose attacking their fortifications from 2 sides? That is risky. If even one of our detachments fails, we will be trapped." Marcus nodded. "It is a risk, but a calculated one. We will divide the army. One detachment will draw their attention with a direct assault, while the other will strike from the rear under the cover of the forest. War is a game of reason. Our task is to stay 1 step ahead." The commanders exchanged glances. Their faces showed a mix of doubt and respect. They knew that Marcus's plans rarely failed. His strategic mind was what kept the Roman army afloat in this seemingly endless war. Cassius was the first to break the silence. "Very well, Caesar. I will lead the main detachment. Let the enemy see us, let them think we are making a mistake. But are you sure the second detachment will arrive in time? The forest may slow them down." Marcus smiled slightly, his eyes shining with confidence. "I am sure, because each of us knows what we are fighting for. We are not merely defending borders, we are defending order, a future that belongs not to us, but to our children and their descendants." The emperor's words filled them with renewed determination. The council ended quickly, and the army began to prepare. The men moved in unison, like a single organism inspired by the clarity and wisdom of their leader. Soon 2 detachments set out. The main force, led by Cassius, moved toward the open field to distract the enemy. Meanwhile, Marcus himself led the second detachment through the dense forest. The soldiers marching with him made almost no sound, walking quietly like hunters, preparing for a deadly ambush. The forest was dark, its branches stretching like hands, snagging on their armor. But no one faltered. They felt the confidence radiating from Marcus, and it gave them strength. With each step, they drew closer to the enemy camp until they finally saw the faint glow of campfires. Marcus raised his hand, signaling them to stop. In that moment, he once again felt that strange clarity that came to him in the tensest moments. He knew their time had come. As the sun slowly rose over the horizon, bathing the battlefield in warm light, Marcus Aurelius stood on a hill, gazing into the distance. Victory had been achieved, the enemy defeated, but there was neither pride nor triumph in his heart. Instead, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. Responsibility for those who believed in him, who fought under his banner, and for those who had been captured, broken, and lost in this war. He knew that his entire life, every battle, every decision, was but a fleeting moment in the infinite flow of time. Yet he also knew that within this brief moment, he was obligated to leave something that would live on beyond him, to leave behind a world built on reason, virtue, and humanity. Marcus turned to his men. The soldiers, exhausted but full of respect, looked at him. There were no loud shouts in his voice, only a calm strength that could reach straight to the heart. "Remember," he said, "every victory of ours is not just a battle for land or glory. It is a battle for the kind of people we want to be. We must not only defeat our enemies, but also conquer the fear, anger, and hatred within ourselves. Only then can we build a world worthy of our efforts." His words were simple, but they held a truth that everyone could feel. The soldiers nodded, silently accepting these words as a vow, as a guide for the future. Now, my friends, I want to address you. This story of Marcus Aurelius is not just a tale of the past. It is a reminder that each of us, like him, is fighting our own battle. Perhaps it is not a war on the battlefield, but it is a war for our time, for our goals, for our dreams. And today, I want to remind you, each of us has the power to choose how we respond to challenges, to choose what we leave behind. Like Marcus Aurelius, we can be those who build rather than destroy. Those who live with virtue and reason, leaving the world a little better than it was. Think about it. What is your battle today? What can you do to take a step forward, not with fear, but with clarity, as Marcus did? The world changes with every small step, every choice we make, every kind act. If this story has inspired you, I ask you not only to reflect, but to act. Find the strength within yourself to change something in your life, support someone near you, or simply become the best version of yourself. Because the future, as Marcus Aurelius said, belongs to those who believe in virtue and act upon it. Thank you for being with me today. Remember, your strength lies in your mind, your heart, and your actions. And like Marcus Aurelius, you too can leave your mark on the world. Share this story if it has touched you, and tell us how you find your strength in difficult moments. Let our reflections be a step toward something greater. Until next time, friends, and may your path always be illuminated by the stars of reason and virtue.